Hello and welcome. I'm Imran Garda, sitting in for Riz Khan. In a struggle between millions of angry Egyptians and a defiant leader, who will blink first? In response to nationwide protests demanding his resignation, President Hosni Mubarak has told the country he will retire when his current term ends in September, but will never abandon Egypt.
This dear and beloved homeland is my homeland, like as it is the motherland of all the Egyptians, in which I lived and for which I fought. I defended its soil, sovereignty and interest, and I will die on the soil of Egypt.
But protesters are not backing down and are calling for him to leave the country right away. For more than 2 weeks, millions have taken to the streets of Egypt, fighting with police, ignoring curfew orders and braving bullets in an unprecedented show of solidarity. Their calls for political reform are echoing across the Arab world and have galvanized protests in nations such as Jordan and Yemen. Well, today we ask, why has public anger erupted in Egypt, and how will the ongoing protests shape its future? Remember, you can send us your questions and comments by emails and text messages on the show. Well, joining us now from New York is Stephen P. Cohen, president of the US-based Institute for Middle East and Development. He has been involved in facilitating several peace initiatives in the Middle East. And with us here in the studio as well, Mustafa Al-Gindi, a former member of the Egyptian Parliament for the Wafd Party and a spokesperson for the opposition coalition. And also with us, Egyptian activist Sharif Mansour, who works for Washington, D.C. based Freedom House, an organization that supports democratic change around the world. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Sharif Mansour, if I could start with you. First of all, these pro-Mubarak supporters that we've seen enter the fray, they've clashed with the protesters wanting Mubarak to go. How would you characterize them? Are they rent-a-mob? Are they plainclothes policemen, or are they actually real supporters of Hosni Mubarak?
Well, there is some facts that already been discovered that some of the people who were captured have IDs that shows their affiliation with Egyptian police. But also, we cannot totally undermine Hosni Mubarak. He has a party that's for so long, 30 years, have been in power. So there is a lot of people who have interest in seeing that regime continue, and there are a lot of people who benefit from the current system where there is corruption and where there is absolute power monopoly. So these are some of the interests of the businessman community, the police forces, who had to be dismantled by the overwhelming majority of Egyptian people who stood in front of them over the last few days.
Mr. Al-Gindi, Hizb al-Wafd, your party, pulled out of those parliamentary elections very recently, decided that it will not work with the NDP or the government at all. What was the tipping point?
It was a fraud election where Mubarak got 95% of the seats. And when we decided to go into election, we said if anything happened during election, we will withdraw. And that's exactly what happened.
And you created a parallel parliament.
And then, absolutely, when it happened, when we withdrew at the Wafd, after us, Muslim Brother came and withdrew, Nasiris came and withdrew, and then we created the parallel parliament that the president had laughed at when he was speeching at his speech in the parliament, saying, let them play or let them spend time. Anyway, we created it. This parliament has 50 members of parliament who represent all you have Nasiri, you have Wafd, you have Tagamma, you have all the Muslim Brother, you have everybody in there, and you have 50 personality of Egypt, judges, Supreme Court judges, ex-ambassadors, big personalities in Egypt, and we created the popular parliament that we called it the popular parliament, where you have these 100 persons are inside.
Now, one of the questions is, how far apart are you, your party, and the Muslim Brotherhood in terms of your agenda? Because there's a great fear that the Muslim Brotherhood will hijack any form of democratic uprising and try to use democracy as a ladder to get to theocracy and throw that ladder away. That's been spoken about a lot in Western press, amongst US circles and the like. How far apart are you and the Muslim Brotherhood?
No, for the time being, we are all united. You know, these 5 fingers who represent 12, the Muslim Brother, 6th of April, Kifaya, now they are united in one hand, to face one hand. But I will tell you something. This is not, I don't agree. Why? In the year 2000 and in the year 2005, we used to have good election with a judge on every box for the election. 2000, the Muslim Brother got 10%. 2005, they got 20% because all the independents who won at 70% joined Mubarak party. Then the street wanted to give a penalty. Then they give it more to the Muslim Brother. I think that the Muslim Brother, in a very large scale, yani, if you want to be really generous, they will go to 10%. I think. But they are organized. They are 10% organized. Then they can lead. Yes, of course, they can lead if there is not this union of all the parties and all the direction in Egypt united with them. We don't leave them alone. They are in the middle. 100, they have 10 seats. We have Copts who have seats. We have women who have seats. Everybody has seats inside. We agreed between us how much you worth, every one of us.
Okay.
Then this, what I want to say is that uniting and keeping them in the middle, they will never go further than that.
Okay, I want to go to Stephen Cohen in New York. Mr. Cohen, it sounds like this is a very healthy opposition movement, despite the fact that it was very much shackled by Hosni Mubarak. Does this opposition movement not need the United States and others more than ever before?
What the opposition movement needs, most of all, is to propose a transitional state, a transitional regime, until an election can be held, because they need to be able to show that in this transition, the elements of the opposition that are not as well organized as the Brotherhood, who still need to improve their organizational capability and their electioneering capability, will be able to be prepared for an election. So it is not the case that the full advantage of the organization of the Muslim Brotherhood will prevail in the election.
Why not?
There has to be. Because we have seen the case of Morocco, where there was a dominant Muslim Brotherhood victory, and they made it clear after that victory that they intended there to be this election in which they won and no subsequent election. Moreover, there was the example of the election in the West Bank, in Palestine, where Hamas was the winner, and since that time they have been unwilling to permit the emergence of any subsequent election. They simply won't allow it to happen.
Well, they've been under economic and a political blockade for 3 years. Surely that influenced it, didn't it, in the Gaza Strip?
There's no question that Hamas has been under an economic boycott from the international largesse that has gone to Gaza when it was under the control of the Palestinian Authority. That is true. But that does not justify their prevention of their own people from engaging in another election which would either confirm that they really are the choice of the people, in which case it would become very difficult for the international community to continue this boycott.
Okay, before this conversation becomes one about Hamas, let's talk some more about U.S. foreign policy as it relates to Egypt and the U.S. reaction, which has become as much of a story perhaps as the protest in Egypt itself. Let's listen to what U.S. Vice President Joe Biden had to say a few days ago when the protests were beginning, and how U.S. President Barack Obama reacted after Hosni Mubarak's announcement on Tuesday.
Look, Mubarak has been an ally of ours in a number of things that he's been very responsible on relative to geopolitical interest in the region, the actions Egypt has taken relative to normalizing relationship with Israel. I think that it would be, I would not refer to him as a dictator.
He recognizes that the status quo is not sustainable and that a change must take place. Indeed, all of us who are privileged to serve in positions of political power do so at the will of our people. It is my belief that an orderly transition must be meaningful, it must be peaceful, and it must begin now.
So, from a ringing endorsement of Mubarak to a terse call for orderly transition. Stephen P. Cohen, if I could come to you again, if we wind back the clock, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was a secular nationalist and perhaps arguably far less repressive to his people than Hosni Mubarak was, he was called a dictator by the United States, by most Western powers. Even Time magazine used to refer to him as, quote, the dictator of the Nile. And there you have Vice President Joe Biden defining Mubarak as not being a dictator by his strategic value to the United States and his policies towards Israel. I mean, shouldn't Biden be ashamed of himself for defining it in that way?
I wouldn't say whether Biden should be ashamed of himself or not. Joe Biden's responsibility is to try to speak for the strategic interest of the United States. But if we ask ourselves where Americans stand and where President Obama stands now, it is clear that they have come to understand that this uprising is an uprising that is genuine expression of the will of the people. And I think that we have to say one more thing than that. There has been a tendency of the United States in its many discussions with Egypt and the discussions between the President of Egypt and the President of the United States, that when push came to shove, the United States emphasized with Mubarak their strategic interests in the region, whether it was the decision that was made to create an international coalition that pushed Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, or whether it was the decision to make sure that the negotiations between Israel and Hamas and the Palestinian Authority had a chance of success. The United States emphasized these things and did not emphasize the concerns it had for the quality of the governance of Egypt itself.
Okay, Mr. Cohen, point made.
That is a mistake.
Point made, Mr. Cohen. I want to get a response from Sharif Mansour here. This idea that we support you, we support the protests, we support democracy and your need and hope for freedom, but we've also got something called our strategic interest or our national interest. I mean, it's easy to tell Vice President Biden, try telling that to the Egyptian protesters. How would they respond?
Absolutely. As an Egyptian, I would like to invite President Biden to be living in Egypt for 30 years under Mubarak, then talk about whether he's a dictator or not. I think that's not for Biden to talk about. I think millions of Egyptians have already said that clearly and loudly. And also the whole situation about the U.S. foreign policy and how they dealt with it, I think they need to understand that what happened in Tunisia and what's happening in Egypt is going to change their policy, whether they like it or not, about the Middle East. The Middle East have been one of the most oppressive regions in the world. There is going to be democratic transition happening, and they need to reconsider their interest based on this new dynamic. And I think the lesson that they should get, freedom matters. People are the real ally of the U.S. because they will be the long-term partner in the transition and what's after the transition.
Okay, Mustafa Al-Gindi, let's look at specifics then and look at specific worries of the United States with regards to its strategic interest. If you came to power, whether it was a coalition, whether WAFD dominated a coalition or not, would you tear up the peace deal with Israel?
Of course, we are a nation of peace since thousands of years. If we wasn't a nation of peace, Jesus wouldn't run to Egypt.
No, would you tear it up?
Of course,
yeah?
we will. No, we will support.
You will support it.
Of course, and let us talk now with an eye of a bird, if we can say. We have the people in the street in Egypt now, and they are a power. You have the army in the street, and he is a power, and you have the international fairness of geopolitics about the world or peace in the world.
Okay, do you mind if I look at it another way?
How can I satisfy these three? The street, the army, who is ruling this country since 5,000 years, and the international instance. I think if we go into the road of Israel, Turkey, a presidential parliamentary republic, democratic republic, where you have a prime minister who comes by the vote of the people, you have a strong army
understood,
who
that's the model. No,
the Constitution.
Understood, that's the model you want. Fair enough. But I'm talking about specifics with regards to foreign policy. Let's forget about peace or not peace with Israel. Let's talk about maybe the blockade on Gaza. The fact that Mubarak in Egypt has been seen as being complicit in the blockade of Gaza because he's closed the Rafah border. If you came to power, would you open the Rafah border?
I will look to all the treaties that I have. Let us talk. We are not living in a box. We are living in a world. We have people around us, and we need to do the things right. This is Egypt, 5,000 years. This is civilized. We have to talk civilized. We will look. But if I found out that my brothers in Gaza, I went to Gaza several times, they are dying, not only I will open the door, I will open the door of my house.
Right.
For them.
But then you would understand. But then you would understand Israel's fears, because they feel and this is something that Hosni Mubarak accepted from Israel, that he'd keep the border closed because Israel believes that if the Rafah border was open, Hamas will be armed to fight Israel with rockets.
No, I will tell you something. You want peace. There was no peace 30 years when Mubarak. There was peace between Mubarak and the Israeli government, but between the nation there was no peace. You want peace between the nation? Get democracy in Egypt to talk democracy in Israel. How can you make two nations talk together, one in a democratic and one under a dictator? Get the people together. We can bring peace because we will go into reality. We don't want to keep Israel. I am the only one who talk with Israel, and anyone who talk with Israel, he's a threat. No, you have a treaty, you talk. As you say good thing, you say bad thing, you say stop. You cannot kill Palestinian. Right. I cannot keep peace with you as a nation when you are not following the rules, humanity, right. Basic. Right. I mean, Israel was created in 1948 by a resolution who say Israel and Palestine in one resolution. Isn't it time now to come and put our hand into it and say 2 states, 2 capitals? Isn't it time for Israelis and for Arabs and for all the region? The only way to get there, it's not with the dictator. The only way to get there, it's with democracy. Because democracy will negotiate with democracy. Then it makes sense. But democracy, when it talks with dictator, it does not stay long. America and Israel played on one man. Okay. The man is gone. Okay. You have to play on the nation.
Let's talk about this prospect of a transition. I want to bring in an email from one of our viewers. He's called Ilgiz Kwambar from the Kyrgyz Republic. He says, the violent toppling of a government does not guarantee swift reform. The best case scenario would be for Mubarak to work with the vigilant Egyptian people to seek a peaceful transition to fair elections. Sharif, I think that's what Mubarak is claiming he wants to do now. Vice President Suleiman has been named the first vice president in 30 years. What is that? Is that window dressing, or is that a serious move?
I think it's a tactic that's textbook in every transition to democracy. It's exactly what happened 2 weeks ago from Ben Ali in Tunisia. They, under the overwhelming pressure from the people, they start making concessions, and every concession follows it another concession because people get more angry. And I think that the guarantee for a peaceful transition will be to respond to the people demand. These people said we're going to die in Tahrir Square.
And he said he's going to die in Egypt, and he's not
exactly. But who's going to die? A dictator surrounded by military, or 8 million people who showed up in the street? I think we're going to see that happening soon. But my point is, Mubarak is losing trust. He has been in power for 30 years. If he wanted real change, he could have done it. The same demands that he announced yesterday was put forward by a petition that's signed by 1 million people working with the Baradei coalition to call for this specific demands. He came short on these demands.
Right.
There were 7 demands. He only are talking about 2 of them.
Okay, I want to go to Stephen P. Cohen. I want to ask him about this prospect of a transition, which, Mr. Cohen, you spoke about up front. You said that the opposition needs to prove that it can handle a transition and that the political parties need to organize themselves. Isn't it an insult to the Egyptian people for Hosni Mubarak to name Mr. Suleiman as a vice president, a man who is alleged to have been involved in the CIA's rendition program? He's handpicked by Mr. Mubarak, and you don't get any closer to Mubarak's regime than Mr. Suleiman. Isn't that throwing dirt in the face of the Egyptian people?
I don't think he meant to throw dirt. I think what he meant to do by the appointment of a vice president was to indicate to anybody who was looking that it meant that his son Gamal Mubarak was no longer a candidate for succession, that he had given up on the idea of a Mubarak dynasty. And that was his first step in moving away from the thoughts that had existed over the last years, because the Gamal Mubarak idea was a symbol for many of the people in the demonstrations that Mubarak was not really ready to see a different kind of regime. And I think that it goes deeper than the question of the regime. It has to do with the fact that neither the local leaders nor the United States have recognized that the big issue of the region is the future of its young people. We have millions and millions of young people who at this time have no prospect of a decent job, of a decent income in which they will have a chance to marry when they wish. These are the fundamental issues of the region. The traditional strategic issues are not as important as this fundamental issue that underlies the problems of all of these countries. Can they find a direction which would give satisfaction to these young people that they are controlling their own lives, that they have a prospect of a good life, that they will have the kind of education that gives them a chance to enter at a decent level in the international economy? These are the questions. It is not simply a question of strategy. It is a question of recognizing the fundamental social and political need of a new generation of millions of young people.
Mr. Cohen, I'm going to have to stop you there. You did make your point, but we have run out of time for the program, unfortunately. Thank you very much, Stephen P. Cohen, and of course in the studio with me, Sharif Mansour and Mustafa Al-Gindi. It was a great pleasure hearing your thoughts here on the Riz Khan Show. We hope to have you on the air again. And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can watch a podcast of the show on iTunes. This week, we're featuring a discussion with the former Pakistani President, Pervez Musharraf, about the challenges his country is facing. And on the next show, we discuss the political vacuum facing Egypt and possibly the region. Will ideology and democracy collide? And will global powers be changing their policies to the region? Make sure to tune in for that. We'll see you next time.